Hi everyone, my name is Ariana Herrera, and our group topic was gut and microbe infections, and I chose to specifically focus on Giardia. We'll talk more about it later, exactly what Giardia is, but I want to give you a little background as to why I chose it. I've worked in the food industry for about 3.5 years now, and during that journey, I have um, became a shift leader, and one of my responsibilities was to fill out questionnaires and ensure the safety of our guests, the safety of our food to our guests, and make sure that we are being as clean as possible. And throughout those questionnaires, a couple of these gut infections have shown up. Infections such as E. coli and Shigella and even Giardia. So when I saw those, it kind of piqued my interest because it sounded something you typically don't think about when you think about running or being a part of and working at a restaurant exactly. You don't think, oh, well, they know exactly what kind of that worker taking my order knows exactly what to do if there's a possible case of Giardia or possible signs of Giardia in the restaurant. But it actually really opened my eyes because it sounded more scientific than I was used to seeing on a daily basis. And so that piqued my interest a little bit. And although I've never really done much research on exactly each one of these infections, I was given this opportunity in this class to research more and find out more information about exactly what Giardia is. And so that helped me kind of go through and do better in my thorough cleaning and relaying of information to my coworkers about um, this infection and what it can how harmful it can be, and hopefully I can you can follow along and I can share more that information with you as well, and so it's beneficial for everyone. So yeah, again, my topic is Giardia, and let's go and I can show you more about it. All right, we're going to start off with some general information, which is going to talk about how it's spread, um, just its name, its common name and scientific name, some symptoms, and how it's diagnosed. So the first three are going to be the scientific names: Giardia intestinalis, Giardia lamblia, Giardia duodenalis. So if you can kind of tell, Giardia is the first name for most of the scientific names, but the last names, intestinalis and duodenalis, you kind of think of the GI tract, or your intestines, or um, your bowels, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, and so it makes sense as to why it is a gut and microbe infections that we're talking about, and why this is under that subtopic. Um, the more common name is beaver fever, and as we go along with the presentation, I'll be able to better explain it as to why in the next couple of slides. Alright, so what exactly is Giardia? It is a parasite, and one of the most common symptoms, although there are a very long and extensive list of them, one of the main symptoms that can be found across all carriers and all people who are infected with it is diarrhea, and which makes sense because it is affecting your GI tract. The parasite itself is covered with a protective shell that is actually called a cyst, and this protective shell allows it to survive weeks to months outside of the body in quote unquote harsh environment, where the inside the body is a little bit, nicer and not as exposed. Um, and also, it makes it tolerant to chlorine disinfectants, different chlorine disinfectants. But working at Chick-fil-A, I was able to see what kind of, we use specific disinfectant sprays and that are able to combat this type of, if it we're presented with the problem that we need to kill Giardia. That's why it really piqued my interest too, as to why there was specific cleaning solutions for specific infections or specific microbes. And it better made me understand as to why. So it was very interesting to me personally. Here is a closer version or a closer image of Giardia. So here is the cyst, the hard protective shell outside, and then a Giardia is this entire thing, but it's inside too, the protective shell. Where can it be found? Surfaces, soil, food, and water that have been contaminated by human feces or have been contaminated by some kind of contact with human feces. It is also found in intestines, and that's where it tends to stay and lives off of other organisms and feeds off of it. And it's not only humans that can be carriers, also dogs, cats, beavers, and deers. So that's where the term beaver fever comes from. Is you'll see more on how it can be contracted too or later, but a brief rundown is if you're drinking from a contaminated stream, you can contract Giardia because upstream there may be beavers forming dams and be carriers for it and contaminate the water and to pass it downstream to people who may be drinking it and not aware that it's contaminated. So that's why it's called beaver fever. How is it spread? See here, you can see that it can be spread by consuming water sources that are contaminated. Water sources like lakes, rivers, springs, streams, and ponds. Another way is if you touch a surface that can contain Giardia and you put your hands in your mouth before washing your hands properly, then you can contract it or you can get some form of be a host for Giardia. Another way is traveling to countries that are known to have Giardia or have water streams that are known to be contaminated with Giardia. And with any other infection, being in close contact with somebody who is a host for Giardia, eating food that is uncooked, which means you are not cooking it, and if it had Giardia on it, you're not cooking it for it to heat up and kill the Giardia off of the food that you're eating. And also, since it has to do with fecal matter, if you have sexual encounters that fecal matter plays a part in, that is another way for it to be contracted and spread. Some symptoms. Again, the main one is diarrhea. We have gas or flatulence, and a lot of it's stuff to do with your GI tract, any of your intestines, your stomach. So I've read that and I've learned that it kind of goes between having diarrhea or greasy stool. And because of that diarrhea, it leads to dehydration and weight loss. And because it alternates from soft, greasy stool, it causes foul-smelling diarrhea. And because you're not getting your stool is passing through you so fast through diarrhea, you're not absorbing the nutrients necessary, necessary nutrients. So one of the symptoms is failure to absorb fat, lactose, vitamin A, and vitamin B12. And all these symptoms can last from 2 to 6 weeks and may not be noticeable right away. It may not be noticed until about 1 to 3 weeks after an infection. And most people, especially here in the United States, are actually asymptomatic. Other less common symptoms would be hives, swelling of the eyes and joints, itchy skin. And what I really found interesting in the way that it sucks, for lack of a better term, is that it could go away, and so it's like a tease. Like you can go away, and you're like, okay, well, I'm over it. But at the same time, it can come back in a couple days to even a couple weeks. And then looking specifically in children, it depends on the severity, but it can cause mental and physical growth delay for them as well. Who is at most risk of getting it? Most risk of getting it. So because it has to do a lot with human feces and the fecal matter, children who aren't taken care of properly, who sit in their soiled diapers, typically more looking at daycare settings where it's usually not a one-to-one ratio of caretaker to child. It can be easily overlooked, and thus children can contract it through their own fecal matter. Um, or the person themselves, the caretaker, can contract it because the neglect is there of leaving the child in their own fecal matter, so they run a bigger risk of getting it as well. And because it's more prevalent in other countries, travelers tend to get it. And since if you are traveling like hiking or camping or backpacking through certain countries or even through the US and you come by a stream that you see may be okay and you decide to take a drink of water, and it could be contaminated, and that's why they're at more of a risk of getting it. How is it diagnosed? So it's it's diagnosed through testing stool samples, but because it takes a while from if you don't if you don't feel that you have the symptoms for about 1 to 3 weeks until since you've had it, and the symptoms come and go, they may need to take multiple samples. One of the main ways of doing it is um, getting a trichrome staining, which diagnose feces with Giardia. So down here you can see that this is more of an in-depth view of a slide of a trichrome sample of Giardia, and you can see that we have presentation here and here. How can you prevent and control it? So with any infection, the best way to do it is practicing good hygiene, which means especially especially now, practicing good hygiene is a really efficient way of helping to prevent and control it. Washing hands is a really big way, and washing hands properly. So that means washing your hands with warm soap and water for at least 20 seconds. A good way, just a little tip, a good way I like to do it is breathing in for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, and repeat that. So that gives you about 20 seconds, and also gives you a good kind of breather and help you center yourself again, and just help to make sure like your mental health is like a good thing. Like, it's something really important that we have to focus on. And doing that, I find that it helps me kind of center myself again, and making sure that it diminishes any distractions around. Another good way is to avoid drinking or water or eating food that you may suspect being contaminated with Giardia. And to just be careful with sexual encounters that may have fecal matter present in any sort of way. Just it depends on the cleanliness of the situation, but making sure that you're clean and no matter what is just practicing good hygiene is basically covers that. Just being aware that that's one of the possibilities that can arise from certain sexual encounters. All right, moving on to sources of infection and risk factors. So, looking specifically at global disease, about 2% of adults and 6 to 8% of children in developed countries have will get it or have had it. Um, yeah, I'm so sorry. Actually, nearly 33% of people in developing countries have had Giardia, but nearly 2% of adults and 68% of children in developed countries are at risk of getting it. And then looking more closely at the United States, Giardia is the most common intestinal parasitic disease affecting humans. And I'm not sure exactly as to why that may, what contributes to that exactly. And during my research, I did not see anything about restaurants being um, poor and unsafe conditions. I saw more as to why the travel and people drinking contaminated water and actually sexual encounters as well. And then looking specifically at an infected person can shed about 1 to 10 billion cysts per day through their feces and can last for several months. And then so think about that, about 1 to 10 billion cysts per day through their feces. But again, if we think about it, as long as good hygiene is being looked after and being sought for, um, and making sure you're cleaning up after yourself and using a good disinfectant and a proper disinfectant for it can help eliminate the possibility of contaminating someone else or someone that you share a bathroom with. But again, it's highly likely that it could happen since only 10 cysts can make a person ill. And if there's 1 to 10 billion cysts being shed per day through just feces, 10, 10 cysts is all it takes to make someone ill. So it's a very high like a high percentage of spreading. And then another ways it can be spread is either person to person, animal to person, since animals can be carriers too, and oral to anal contact during sex. So that's how the sexual encounter comes into play. Um, and then infections tend to be higher during late summer months. And in a research between 2006 to 2008, in the United States, cases of Giardia were twice as high between June and October as they were between January and March. So June, October are the late summer months, and below I will show you more in depth as the graph I got from that study. And then um, because there's different types of Giardia, the animal to person contact isn't as high as the person to person rate, just because there's different types. So here's a closer look at the graph of the year and the number of, so this is talking about age too, so you can even further see as to what ages it affects more and throughout the year. So you can see starting in January, and actually all throughout the year, those who are ages 1 to 4 have the highest cases, and but they all trend kind of down throughout the beginning of the year, and then towards June, it starts to trend up and spiking in July, August, and trending down again after August, September, but it's still pretty high then starting off in January, and it trends all the way down again in December, and again continuing that year again, you can see that it is higher in the late summer months. I just wanted to go back and show you that the highest number of cases is about 325 for those in the 1 to 4 year category during the peak of July, August time. Now looking into pathogens and environment. So the causal agent. Giardia duodenalis is a protozoan flagellate, and it was actually named first primarily Sorchomonas intestinalis by Lamble in 1958, and then renamed Giardia lamblia, named after the scientist who found it, by Stiles in 1915, in order to honor the scientist who worked with us, as well as the Professor A. Giard of Paris. So we got Giardia from the Professor Giard, and Lamblia, from the doctor. And so in considering this name, it was actually renamed Giardia duodenalis for the correct taxonomic name of the protozoan. The life cycle. An infection occurs with the ingestion of the cyst, and then the small intestine excitation releases trophozoites, and then so each cyst produces true trophozoites, and then it multiplies exponentially, and then it remains in the proximal small bowel where it can be free or attached to the mucosa by a ventral sucking disc. And the excitation occurs as the parasites transit towards the colon. Because the cysts are infectious when passed in the stool or shortly after, person-to-person transmission is possible. So that's why it's so high, and it's more likely to be passed person to person, is because it is very infectious in the stool, and that's why the stool has so many cysts within the the billions of cysts that are present in 1 day of feces. So we're going to move on. I'll be able to show you a closer graph of the life cycle of Giardia. So here we can see is a contaminated water, food, or hands are infected with cysts, and then so these are the cysts, and they're ingested, and it follows through the digestive tract, the stomach, into the colon, and the small intestine, the large intestine, and then it is transported out through feces. And then you can see here that it's infective stage, and the diagnostic stage is towards the end too. And then as far as treatment goes, we'll talk about more as to drugs and other forms of treatment. So there are several drugs that can be used to treat it. The 3 main ones are metronidazole, tinidazole, nitazoxanide, and some alternatives will be the following 3, because the primary 3 are not routinely available in the U.S. So alternatives would be paramomycin, quinacrine, and furazolidin. And the effectiveness. So there are many different factors that play into the effectiveness of the medications, the treatments. The medical history, like with anything, medical history needs to be taken into account when treating anyone with any type of infection or disease. The nutritional status, especially since uh, with if you do have the infection, Giardia, if you do have Giardia, it will mess with the capability of you getting the proper nutrients for your food since you are presenting with symptoms of diarrhea and liquidy stools and fatigue. And then the condition of the immune system. So you have to take that into account as to see what other infections you have or you can be used to be or be immune to. Alrighty, that is my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it and were able to see more information about how important it is to have knowledge on this infection and um, see how it could possibly be a situation where we need to make sure it's kept from food sources, water sources, especially in those places that may not have the best restaurant and dining establishments that may not have the best um, cleanliness score, like the ABC score by the health department. So this is one of the factors that we look into, especially when in the food industry. And I was able to understand why and how important it was through this experience of me researching Giardia a little bit more. Thank you.